Well, hello, and welcome back to the Charlie Darwin Textiles Studio. I want to show you, these are all button-up shirts. They all have different design elements to them that make them exude a different vibe, give a different silhouette on the body, mix and match a little differently with different pants and layering. And today I want to dive in to about 7 or 8 design decisions that are really baked into a button-up shirt, jacket, dress, a button-up, we're just gonna call it. And by the end of this video, my hope is that you could look at any button-up shirt and know exactly what elements are giving it that vibe and be able to make really informed design choices as you start building up a collection of button-ups in your wardrobe. And button-ups are my favorite, clearly. I have made so many of them as I've been building out my dream linen wardrobe, and I think that's because they're really versatile. They've got the ability to be worn as a jacket, even at like a long midi length. You can have like a duster jacket, or you can button it up to be a dress. You could do a shorter jacket or dress. I like the versatility of changing the neckline depth because you can button and unbutton. And I also just love the look of like cute little wood buttons or seashell buttons. Those are the ones I always choose to put on my garments. And actually, I'm right in the middle of finishing up the design for a new sewing pattern that I'm going to be releasing in probably mid to late August. It's for my Wren button-up shirt. And for all of my sewing patterns, I like to try and bake in lots of design variations, different collar styles, different sleeve lengths and styles and pockets and things like that, so that you can really reuse the pattern a bajillion times and customize it to what you want it to be, in addition to being able to customize it by height. Because really at the core of a sewing pattern is just kind of like the shape of the bodice, and then everything off of that can be tweaked around and hacked so that it gives you a distinct vibe. And as I was starting to work on this pattern, I thought I really want to share with the group how I think about these design decisions, what goes through my head as I'm deciding what to put into my sewing pattern, because of course there are tons of design options and variables I could add in that I still choose not to. Even though I'm going to have like 20 plus design variations on here, I have to be a little discerning at times, and I want to walk through that and also open your brain up to all of the ways that you could be changing the design elements of a garment. Whether you're using my patterns and I kind of give you those variations in pattern format, or if you're doing your own free ballin' on pattern hacks with another more narrowly designed pattern, you are going to have a little brain blast here of inspiration, ways that we can make a button-up shirt look a little bit more special and unique to you and what you're going for. All right, let's dive into the different elements. We're gonna move from kind of up at the collar all the way down to the length of the hem here. So the collar is one of my favorite places to switch things up, give variations, because along with the sleeves, it really changes the look of the garment. My favorite go-to is the band type collar, which really just uses like the collar stand pattern piece when you're sewing, as compared to the traditional collar down here has that pointy collar, but it's still sewn onto a collar stand. So really it's just like an extension or a second piece added to the band collar. What I like about the band collar though is I think it is really simple. It's really easy to wash and dry, like without too much fuss or curling, but I also love the curling of the traditional collar, but it definitely gives this more simplistic finish up top. And there are fun ways, as we'll see in the embellishment section of this video, to add extra little texture details into the seam line there. So that's really fun. I'm definitely going to add the band collar to this next pattern, that's like the original OG collar that was on this Wren shirt in the first place. And I'm going to definitely offer the traditional collar because I think every button-up shirt, you just want the option for a traditional pointy collar. These were my most obvious choices, but there were definitely 3 others that I considered. One made the cut. So one that I considered was doing, it's very similar to like a band collar, but much more squared off and tall. And I have a jacket kind of like this that I got from, I think, Paris maybe, and I really do love it, but I figured this is close enough to just being a pattern hack of the band collar piece, something that you could easily reshape on your own pattern. So I didn't include it as a variation. You know, I can include a lot of variations, but the pattern instructions could become 100 pages. So the chunky boxy collar, I'm going to leave that up to you guys to just make that adjustment on your pattern piece. I did also consider the Peter Pan collar because that was one that I included in my Finch. But honestly, I never wear a Peter Pan collar myself. It's like kind of more complex to instruct. And for both those reasons, I was just like, I'm not bothering with that one this time. But if you have my Finch pattern, you could always kind of co-opt that for this new pattern. One that I did, ding, 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 end up going with is a bias bound collar. This is a photo submitted from one of my customers in my customer photo gallery on my site. She was making the Ladybird jacket dress, and she did her own thing and just completely removed, like, did not use the collar pieces I gave and just did a bias bound collar, and I had never thought of that. Totally loved it when I saw it, and so for that reason I decided that's a fun new one to try out on this next pattern. I think that's a cool look, especially for something you're gonna wear as like a jacket, and so yes, we're going with bias bound collar. Let's talk sleeves. This is another huge part of the design outcome of a shirt, in my opinion, because it really changes the silhouette of that upper portion and middle portion of your body. The original OG Wren shirt has straight long sleeves, and I love how simplistic these are. They're simple to sew, simple to wear. They just have like a thin double fold hem at the wrist, and they're wide enough so that you can bend your elbows, but not super poofy. And when I'm designing a garment, I love to play around with how much of it I can simplify so that the features I want to amplify stand out better. So like on this shirt right here, you know, I did a very simple bodice, simple sleeve in a plain fabric because I really wanted to showcase the beauty of the wood buttons and the faux fray on the collar neckline. And I don't think that those details would stand out so much if I had a lot of other crazy stuff going on the garment. So it's a kind of a balance of how much you want going on. So that's what I love about the straight, simple long sleeve. And I'm definitely putting that one in the pattern. But something that's more traditional on a button-up shirt, especially more complex shirts with a little bit more tailoring to them, is a cuff. And I do think cuffs are really fun. I think they're for a more intermediate sewist than a beginner sewist, but you're always welcome to jump in and try if you're still a beginner. A cuff is so fun. It involves sewing a button placket right here so that it can kind of split open and also close right here with 2 buttons. It is a little bit more difficult to sew, but I think if you're looking to add a lot of intrigue and texture at the wrist and a little bit of change in volume from like a tighter wrist to the more flowy sleeve, then you can certainly insert a cuff. So I kept cuff because I think, again, that sticks with the traditional button-up shirt, but there's some more fun ones I want to play around with. One is obvious and easy. It's a short sleeve. It's just a short version of the straight sleeve. That's going to be on the pattern because who doesn't love a short sleeve button-up? Actually, my boyfriend doesn't. I love a good short sleeve button up for the summer. And then there are a few other variations. I did pack a lot in on this one. And so which of these others am I going to include? Well, the bishop sleeve, I love a good poof. I love a good ruffle as well. Something that adds a little bit of gathering is so beautiful on linen because it's just so, like, it really holds a beautiful wrinkle. And so any place that you can add gathering, I think, really accentuates the benefits of linen. And so for that reason, I'm a sucker for ruffles. I'm a sucker for bishop sleeves. And so I'm including both. The bishop sleeve is going to have 2 options. One with just a bias bound, like thin hem on it, big enough to get your hand in and out. And then another one where you can actually do the button placket and the cuff for like a much longer area here that's like tight around your wrist. And then ruffles, ruffles are so easy for me to pattern draft because they're just pretty much giant rectangles. And so this pattern, I am going to just steal and use the ruffles from my Finch pattern you can see in this picture, which I'm going to have the ruffle, the double ruffle, you can see here, a tiered ruffle, or tiered bell sleeve. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, let's look at fastenings next as we move our way through the shirt. Fastenings are such a personal, they can be such a personal part of this shirt. I know a lot of people find a little bit of meaning in a button. And on a good button-up shirt, you're gonna have a lot of buttons. Although I will say on the sample I just sewed of this Wren sewing pattern, I didn't do any buttons on the front. And that actually felt so good. I'm going to be wearing it just as a cardigan jacket situation, but buttons are a fun addition that can really add in a new element. Like, that is the sweet part of them, is that, you have all this linen fabric and maybe cotton thread, but you can actually now be adding in different kind of material. Like, this is a seashell button or a wood button, and now you're kind of contrasting your materials a little bit. And I always like to stick with natural fiber clothes. I like to stick with natural, quote unquote, everything's natural. Plastic is technically natural from the earth. Everything is technically from the earth, but I like to stick with a more bio-based, plant-based, like a wood or a seashell non-plastic button for my button downs to match with my plant-based fibers. And typically I do regular buttonholes with my sewing machine. It has a buttonhole foot and a button foot, and that usually works for me 90% of the time. And I will say 5 to 10% of the time I get really freaking pissed at my buttonhole foot. It skips something or the thread breaks halfway through, and it does really annoy me. So I get why people don't love sewing buttons and buttonholes, but once you figure out those 2 feet, you really can get, I'd say 9 out of 10 buttons on there without getting frustrated. And this shirt only needs 9 buttons, so no. You could also hand stitch your buttons on there and your buttonholes. There's tons of tutorials on YouTube for both of those if you want to look into that as an alternative. And then I also found recently this crazy alternative. I'm going to put the video up on the screen right here. This is something I found on Pinterest of, instead of making buttonholes with thread, they're actually making their buttonholes by creating their own button placket. So you have on my shirt pattern, it's going to be what's called a sewn on, what's it called? A folded, this area right here is folded back. And so it's like a self button placket. And in this style, you'd be cutting your center front line where the buttonholes would go, and you're going to be adding on this sewn on button placket where you're constructing just blank space between stitches that's going to give room for the buttons. I could be describing this way worse than the video just shows you on its own, but I think that's a really fun thing to try out. If that's something you want to try on this pattern, I do include on the pattern, I'm going to put the buttonhole line on the pattern so that you know where to cut. You're going to want to cut on that buttonhole line and for your center front, and then you're going to add on this technique to put your different style of buttonholes here. So that's really fun, but I think it's a little too complex for me to put into the pattern. I might do a blog post on it later. I'm really inspired by it, but honestly, I haven't tried it yet. And there's questions of, is this going to be as durable? I think it would be, honestly. Plus, you could always put zigzag, bar tack stitches at the top and bottom, or just go back and forth with your straight stitch at the top and bottom to give extra security above and below the buttons. And then another way that you could avoid buttonholes if they are demons to you, then you could try button loops. But one thing to think about if you're considering doing button loops is that it will change like the neckline of your shirt. You're gonna need to do some thinking about where the two bodice front pieces overlap in the center. Let's say you're putting your button loops on the edge here of this, you're gonna have to put your button all the way over here on your other bodice front piece instead of over here. So be cognizant about where these things are gonna line up in the center of your shirt and will they be centered when you actually finish it. But this is basically, there's two ways you can do button loops. One is to kind of sew it into a long worm inside out and then turn it wrong side out, or you could treat it like mini bias binding, like double fold bias tape and stitch it like that. That's how I do it on my sanctuary pattern on the back loop. All right, let's move on to pockets. I freaking love pockets. Everything needs pockets. I went somewhere this weekend without a pocket and I literally lost my phone instantly on a bench. Like, there should just be pockets on anything. There should be pockets for safety reasons. Okay, so let's talk about pockets though on a button-up shirt and what I went through to decide what to add on here. I knew I wanted to do this pointy pocket. I think that's pretty like traditional, classic. It goes with the pointy, traditional collar. Like they both kind of draw your eye through that pointy situation moving down the body. Love that. I also love if you're going for more of just like basic workwear, a more boxy look. It might be kind of hard to see in this photo because it's white fabric, but a good square pocket is so easy for me to add in because it's just the elimination of the pointy part of the pointy pocket. And then over here, I wondered, well, where else could I put pockets? What could I do with them? And I saw this picture on Pinterest and I said, yes, waist pockets. Absolutely. I love the look of that. It does add a little bit of like attention to the waist and hips area. So if that's not something that you want, then you might want to go with a chest pocket or no pocket, but it does bring a little bit of like weight and visual interest into this area, which I really like for certain looks. It does, however, negate being able to tuck your shirt in very well to a pair of pants or like tie it in a bow in front. So keep that in mind. This is more for like a jacket look. And that's what I did on my sample, which I'll put up on the screen here. And this waist pocket is something I decided I definitely wanted to put into the pattern. So that'll be in there. And then something I'm not putting in the pattern, but I wanted to just plug into your brain is it could be really fun to do a pocket flap situation. And I haven't done this yet, so I didn't feel confident enough time to put it in. But something that kind of flaps over gives a little bit extra dimension, kind of three-dimensionality to your pocket, a little bit of security to keep things in the pocket. But I think that's something you're gonna have to look up another tutorial for at this time. I don't have it in the pattern. Okay, let's talk real quick about length. I'm going to just jump to the chase right now and say I'm not going to bake in any length variations to the pattern besides just I give so much information about like really quick way of how to do a height adjustment. So like if you're not 64 inches, which is what my sewing pattern is made for, then you're going to want to use my height adjustment calculator to make the bodice and sleeve pieces longer or shorter, and I tell you exactly how much to do that and where. So that aside, I'm not actually offering different length variations on this shirt pattern. There's tons of variations baked into the rest of the pattern. I have it currently ending around like, I don't know, I'd say like high hip, especially because it has this curved edge on the side. And so it's like high hip on the side and maybe like mid hip on the front and back. And I just really like that length. It's a super easy bodice to just add or subtract length to if you wanted it to be shorter, longer, even more than the height adjustment calculator. But I also didn't include too many variations there because I offer so many variations in the other button-up patterns that I already sell. So over here on the left two pictures is my canary top. And You can see right here in the gray, I offered that one as a peplum waist, which is really fun, adds tons of texture. Love that one as a shirt slash jacket. But you can also sew this as, you just add a couple inches to this bodice here and sew it as a crop top. So I already have that one there for you. Yes, it has not as many sleeve additions to it, but those ones are there for you if you're looking for a crop top or a peplum straight across. Those are there for you. You can also find longer variations of a button-up by sewing my ladybird jacket dress, which I have already drafted for you as an above the knee and a midi length and maybe a longer length, but it goes into much longer lengths because it actually has like a separate bodice and skirt, and it has more shaping under the bust, just to point that out for you. It has a little bit of bust shaping, but it can be worn as like a duster jacket or a long dress. So if you're looking for long and a pre-drafted pattern for it, just go straight to my ladybird jacket dress. And I did throw this one in here of length variation because I do think what's fun about this length that's standard in the pattern I'm making right now is that you can very easily do the kind of like, I don't know, is this Western? Like a more like Western boho vibe of tying it up at the waist if you have a pant that you want to show off the pockets of a little bit more, or you want to cinch in that waistline. It's super easy to tie up at the waist and get that different silhouette with it. So putting it out there. All right, let's now talk real quick about fabric. And I say real quick because you all know I'm obsessed with linen. I'm gonna sew all of my samples with linen, just piles and piles of plant dyed linen fabric. It's all dyed with pigments from plants. This is what I make all my clothing out of in my own wardrobe, as well as what I sell on my site, what I sew garments for other people, what I sell in my sewing kits. I'm obsessed with medium weight plant dyed linen, and it just, all the plant dyed colors, they mix and match so well with each other, so it's so easy to just pick up any plant dyed color and know it's gonna match well with another plant dyed linen thing in my wardrobe. That all being said, if I didn't have the constraints on my personal wardrobe that I have set, which is plant dyed linen, there are some fabrics that I would love to sew with here and there. And I think specifically for a button-up shirt would look really good. One of them is like a thicker corduroy or canvas. I think could work really well on a corduroy shirt. I do think you got to be careful around making collars and necklines. Those will be a little more difficult with a thick fabric, but just be patient with yourself. I think that would look good to make a button up more jackety, you know, like have some density to it. Sometimes you just want to feel some weight on your body, some security, which I think also brings me to this, like, it almost looks to me like like it might have like some stitching on it, like some quilting on it, like a double layer situation. I love the color of this. These are all Pinterest images, by the way. I really love that. I love whatever this is. I don't know what this stuff is, but this kind of looks like maybe like a waffle linen or some kind of cotton. I love the gingham on it. And then really, I've always been attracted to like a floral cotton. And I think it'd be so fun to build out a whole wardrobe of mix match floral cottons. In my next life, that'll be what I switch to after linen. And I just think that looks so pretty in the button up format. So I just want to give you guys some inspo if you're looking outside of linens here. Next, let's talk embellishments. This is my favorite part of the whole thing. I love I love thinking about embellishments. I wish I could do them more. These are things that you would have to plan ahead before you sew your garment. Even for this one, before you cut your garment. For doing a faux fray spine like this, you're actually cutting your back bodice pieces on the selvage edge of a linen or cotton fabric. It has to have a pretty selvage edge, okay? Don't do it on something that has an ugly selvage edge. A selvage edge is just that, like, that edge that's sort of like pre-bound or like tightly woven by the manufacturer, and sometimes it's got little frays on it. And it's actually the strongest part of the entire roll of fabric, so don't count it out. It's not going to unravel. it's just a beautiful detail to make visible on the outside. I have a whole YouTube video on it if you want to check that out. Same thing, that YouTube video is how to do a faux fray collar. This is actually, you're cutting out a little strip of the selvage edge and sandwiching it into your collar stand, which gives just like a real soft, I think, a really soft transition from your collar into your neck. Like it helps it kind of like diffuse the fabric and give softer edges. You could also do this into a cuff or a pocket seam, anywhere you could just sandwich a little piece of fabric. I love a good faux fray. In a similar vein of sandwiching things into seams like that, you could do like a contrasting floral pop of like doing a solid garment and then have a little bit of floral fun sticking out, or even binding some of your seams there. I will say with that, in contrast to the faux fray being like a diffuse element, I think that contrasting floral pop is, or contrast anywhere in those seams, is really going to call attention to those seams. So this is another time of thinking like, do I want to call attention to this area? Is this the thing that I want to outline? You're basically outlining those elements of the garment. So like, if you're not sure if you like the shape of the collar, maybe don't outline it. That might not, that's just going to accentuate that shape even more because you're really drawing the eye to that area. So just keep that in mind as you choose these elements. And then I did consider adding this as a piece to the pattern, but it was just too much complexity to add in. But little ties, I think they're not functional ties. Like they're not really going to do anything for you, but it is fun to do like a little bow tie at the top of a neckline. It almost looks like from this picture on Pinterest that they strung the ties through a channel right here. That's similar to almost like a band collar. I almost wonder if you could do your neckline bias binding as a channel on mine. I'm not sure. Not sure that even makes sense, but then you'd want to put 2 buttonholes to pull the ties out before you hit the button placket so that they have space to tie. Like that one. So let's look at this collar ruffle right here. It's technically added and sandwiched into my collar stand, very similar to a faux fray right here. And I have all the instructions for that in the sewing pattern. I am including that in this new sewing pattern. But you could also add ruffles like this in tons of seams. So same thing as the faux fray, like you could be adding it into necklines, into the button placket area, into pockets. You could be adding ruffles galore to your button-up shirts. Could also, for any of the sleeve attachments I'm going to be putting in here, there's going to be this seam where your special sleeve attachment attaches to your upper sleeve, and you could actually keep that seam visible and make it be like its own extra ruffle area. And there are freaking embellishments of embroidery-ness. Okay, so these are things I've been saving in my Pinterest board that I'm gonna get to at some point. Maybe you've got the time to try them out. Please send me a picture if you do. I've been eyeballing these French knot bubbles. That's what I'm calling them. I know that these are most likely French knots if you want to Google how to do those, coming right out of the seam line there. I don't know. For some people, that might, and for me, I don't know if that will be a sensory nightmare or sensory brilliance. Like either I'll be touching them all the time as like little nubbies to touch, or I'll be like, get this off me. I think it'll be sensory brilliance. I don't know. I really like that. And then I also really like the sashiko style stitching, especially on this one. I've seen different variations of sashiko style that some are very organized and planned and some are more kind of free-spirited, and like on this one there's many different styles in one area, and you can see they basically like bound thread around their collar stand. I think that's so beautiful. They added kind of a patchwork piece of cloth of fabric here in this area to add contrast. That looks super fun to me. And then some other stitching I saw that I'm intrigued by is like a contrasting running stitch around the shape of some of the pattern pieces. Like here on the cuff of the wrist and the button placket. I do really like that. Down here with the embroidered collar, that looks So cool. This is something that you would want to do, in my opinion, you'd want to do before you sew any of these pattern pieces together, because you'd probably want to do fusible interfacing on this fabric, like on your top collar piece. Fusible interfacing, do your embroidery with beading or not, and then stitch your two collar pieces together into your collar stand, because that, I don't want like all that stitching showing on the underside of the collar. So if you can do it first and then it'll get sandwiched inside the collar pieces, I think that'd be way better. Granted, sometimes you don't know you want it embroidered until you've already sewn the garment. So no, more embellishments. I'm obsessed with embellishments. I just got so many good ideas. I want someone to do them. Someone who has more time than me do these. So next set of embellishments I want to look at are like this seam line situation. Like this looks like yarn almost on this red and blue one. This one looks more like a cord situation. And then you're like stitching it on flat. I think that's called couching. And I love these little seams that are running up and down next to the sides of it. I don't know. Just do it, try it, let me know. Here's more inspo if you wanted to go even jazzier on this. If I was going to do any of my embellishments on my shirt, I would do this one. And I think you would do this one at the end after you've sewn the whole garment. So that's a good one for like you got to the end and then you realized you wanted to add a little something more. Even in 3 years from now, you could decide you want to add a little something more. This would be a fun one for that. So let's talk really briefly about some other stuff that you might be thinking, Leah, why didn't you, I have button-up shirts and they have these other elements that you didn't include. I did have to make some tough decisions here. So one thing that is very common on button-up shirts is having a yoke somewhere, which means that like there's a seam line running across and either the back bodice or the front bodice is constructed of two separate pattern pieces, if that makes sense. It's this upper area is the yoke of the back of this shirt. And on this shirt, which is a shirt I sell in my shop, but not the pattern of, I also have pleats coming out of the back here to add more volume in the back. And I made the decision not to do that. I made the decision many years ago, basically, when I constructed the Wren shirt, because I was sewing a bunch of this shirt, I call the lichen button shirt, and I was sewing a bunch of it, and they took so long to construct and had so many pieces that I basically needed to condense down. I wanted a much easier to sew button-up shirt. I didn't feel that this back yoke was adding enough value to earn its keep. And I also really wanted to add in the spine of the shirt here. I really wanted to add in that design element, and I couldn't do that with how this shirt was constructed. So that's when I went with this, and I'm sticking by it. On this sewing pattern, I'm not doing any yokes on the front or back because I really want that spine and the more simple construction. And in my opinion, I think it fits just as well. I do think if you have a more male physique, because this is a very gender neutral shirt, if you have a more male physique, you may want a little bit more, tiny bit more width in your back, because we aren't going to have any back pleats on there. If you typically wear shirts and you need those back pleats, then you're going to want to add in maybe a little more width at your back there. Some other stuff that you won't find on this pattern are bust darts or pleats, because again, this is a very gender neutral pattern aiming for simplicity. And so I have bust darts on my Argent and Sable pattern, if that's an element that you're really seeking. I have this sleeveless button-up tank top and dress pattern that has bust darts, and my Ladybird jacket dress. If you're looking for the more traditional button-up long or short sleeve shirt jacket, you want more bust shaping, go for my Ladybird jacket dress. That has the pleats down here. And all in all, what I will say is all of my patterns are very flowy. They don't stick to you. They are a bit roomy. And so if you're here for something that sticks to you, you're in the wrong place. If it still has some shaping, but this is a loosey-goosey game here. And I did really want to keep this pattern gender neutral, and I really wanted it to be a simple quick sew. So yeah, those are the elements that I will be and won't be including in this upcoming sewing pattern. It's coming out in just 1 week. Can you believe it? I'm so excited for it. Of course, like all my other patterns, I've been putting in like months of prep into designing and really fine-tuning this pattern so that it's super easy to use right out the gate, very easy to customize to your body height and shape, and just a fun overall sew, and very optimized for using with plant-based fibers like linen and cotton. And also it mixes and matches so well with my other patterns. So if you're someone who's trying to build up your dream plant-based wardrobe like I am, this is a great place to start collecting patterns, because you are going to be able to, first of all, sew one of my patterns in like 20 different ways, as you just saw in this video, but also that pattern is going to mix and match with all of my other patterns. The shirts with the pants, the jackets with the undershirts, they go really well together. It's like building a capsule wardrobe, if you've ever heard of that. I'm so excited for this new pattern to come out. It will be live on August 13th, and it will be on sale for the first 2 weeks. You can be able to get it as a PDF, a printed pattern, or a full-blown sewing kit with my plant-dyed linen. If you're interested and we are still before the launch, you definitely should join my email newsletter. That's where I'm going to tell you when the new pattern is live, send you access to any bonuses or fun perks that come along with the pattern. If you're watching this after August 13th, 2026, the pattern is probably already here and you should go grab it right now if you're interested. It's right there waiting for you, and I'm so excited to help you sew it up. All right, it's been real. Thank you so much for hanging with me today. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.